Now, when I talk about general prep and I ask people what's on their mind for general prep, the first thing that pops into people's mind is always, this is the time to get fit. And I would say absolutely not. I think that that is a very simplistic and a very generic approach to things. And keep in mind, you don't need an 8-hour webinar just to make athletes tired. Anybody can make people tired. It's not hard. So what we really need to do in good general prep phases is to have targeted responses, decide exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish and understand that even general prep is going to be specific to some point and to some extent in the way that we do things in a good training program. So let's go ahead and take a look at what should be included in general prep. First of all, the term intensity is one that I will use dozens of times. Intensity, in short, refers to the difficulty of training. Now, difficulty of training, of course, can take many different forms. Difficulty of training can often, in most of our situations, can refer to the intensity level of the tension that we apply to muscle tissues and connective tissues. This is the case in sprinting. This is the case in jumping. This is the case in weightlifting. Intensity levels can also apply to the degree of distress that we apply to the energy systems in certain situations. But in any case, intensity levels are key, and ultimately our ability to manage and reach intensity levels is going to dictate whether we succeed or whether we fail. Is probably the single most important and the single most overlooked thing in our training. There can come a time when this type of work can be counterproductive. So when I am dealing with athletes, your training age and your level of development has a lot to do with how I handle the absolute strength piece. So for example, if you're young and undeveloped and you come into my program, you're going to squat a little bit in the general prep and you're going to squat real heavy in that specific prep in order to get strong. But things change for you once you have become strong. When I was working with really high level jump athletes, most of them weigh like 180 pounds or so. They could all deep squat about 400 pounds. And I noticed everything got better and better and better and better as they got stronger until I hit about 400 pounds. And then after that, it didn't seem like it helped anymore. So I had a dilemma on my hands. Do I try to increase the squat to 450? And then I started thinking, well, what's really important here is that I maintain balance. I have to keep the slow forms of strength balanced with the explosive forms of strength, with the jump forms of strength. So I'm thinking if I increase strength, this heavy, slow type of strength more, then I have to increase explosive strength and jump strength significantly as well to keep balance in this organism. And I'm already scratching the genetic ceiling here. So I thought it wasn't best. So the point I'm getting at is that I feel that for every event, every sport, and every body type, there comes a time when you become strong enough as far as absolute strength is concerned, and to continue to progress absolute strength development beyond that point typically causes more harm than good. So basically, the way I train you has a lot to do with your training age. And most of the things that I've said here can be kind of generalized to lower training age people. And as we progress forward, I'll give you some options and things that are a little different for higher training ages. So in short, if you're of a low training age, and I don't think you're strong enough yet, in your general preparation, you're going to do that absolute strength prep stuff that we mentioned. And then when you get into specific prep, you're going to do the heavy absolute strength development and the absolute strength complementary stuff. If you're of a high training age, okay, in general prep, I'm not going to make you do much, if any, squatting at all. Then in specific prep, I'll have you do just enough absolute strength development stuff until you're back where you were. So young athletes might squat 4 months. Advanced athletes might squat 4 times, or possibly even less. So that being said, I think it's very important to put that in the correct context as far as how we actually handle that squat component, how we handle the absolute strength, the maximal strength component. I think that often we generalize things. The thing that really bothers me now is that there's a lot of stuff out there about how terrible squats are and all these types of stuff, and it kind of some of it's kind of some misinterpretations of stiffness and so forth. So we have a whole generation of athletes who come up, and now we're not squatting them when they're real young. And as a result of that, there are certain levels of endocrine development that they'll never achieve. And because of that, they're going to have a lower ceiling for the remainder of their lives, for the remainder of their athletic lives. So getting back to our idea of polarization of training, it's all about living at the extremes, okay? Nothing, nothing ruins an athlete more than when you train them in season in middle zones, okay? So staying out of the middle zones of training is what we're trying to do. So we always want, when we look at our neural training, we always want to ask ourselves the question, number one, is it intense enough to help? Keeping in mind that the competitions you're having, the games you're having, are of extremely high intensity. So if they're of very high intensity, something that's not very intense is not going to help. It's not going to progress things. It's not going to help you to improve, and it's not going to maintain. It's going to represent a reduction in training load. So therefore, it's going to represent a potential reduction in fitness level. So it has to be intense enough to help. The second question you ask is it easy to recover from? So the things that you do in the neural world that we consider home base, like acceleration development, light Olympics, those things actually have, because of the lactate we mentioned, actually have a restoration component. So those things are ridiculously easy to recover from. So they're a way of maintaining neuron stimulation. So what we have here is we have things that are really intense, and we have things that are on the lower intensity. We're on training at really high intensities or training at the low home base types of stuff, and we're staying away from the middle ground. So for example, getting ahead of ourselves a bit, if we're going to maybe look at our Olympic lifting program, maybe, okay, well, this makes sense that we would Olympic lift at 90, 95, 100% at this particular time of the year. Of course, we're not going to do it if our athletes are beat up or subject to stressors, but at certain times, this would be a nice strategy and something we want to do. On the other hand, lifting at 60, 65%, that's kind of your endocrine support restoration-ish kind of stuff, and you can recover from that stuff really, really easy. But if you Olympic lifted 80%, if you Olympic lifted 85%, that's the middle zone. It's not intense enough to carry over into the competitions and help you. But lifting at 85% is certainly not easy. So that makes it difficult to recover from. So suddenly we have in our program something that's not intense enough to help, but also difficult to recover from. And as a result of that, that's what we call training baggage. That's stuff that we're doing to make people tired, and all it's doing is creating baggage, it's creating problems with absolutely no benefit whatsoever. Now, to wrap things up, what I thought I would do is put together a chart for you that would illustrate what I personally like to do with speed power training throughout the course of a season, throughout the course of a year. Again, let's kind of review basically the choices for the different times of the year here. So that with each key neural training component, okay? So again, these are the 4 phases that represented the 4 different talks that I gave and the 4 different topics at the different times of the year. So in general preparation, basically all we're going to do is acceleration development, either resisted or on the flat. And the reason why, again, is potentiation, neural drive, and again, what we're doing is we're trying to drive rate coding increases. And the reason why acceleration development is because acceleration development is very safe because of the distances that are being sprinted there. Then, once we move a little deeper into the year and we get into our specific training phases, then we start to address speed development. Maximal velocity is hit in some type of construct. If you're a track and field athlete, you're doing really true sprint, float, sprint kind of stuff. If you're like a big person, then you're doing shorter sprints where you just touch max velocity. So it's done in an individualized way. That would represent the high end of our polarized approach, and reviewing acceleration development, continuing to do it would represent the low end of our polarized approach. In-season management, all right, this is where some sports, either speed endurance or repeat sprint ability, become what we do. All right, they become the high end of our polarized approach. Continuing to review acceleration development is the low end of our polarized approach. But all sports don't necessarily need to do this stuff. Again, it might be embedded in the sport, or there might not be a need to do it in at all. I don't have throwers do speed endurance. I don't think that basketball centers need to do speed endurance. So what we do is we make sport-specific choices. You, as a coach, have a unique understanding of the workings of your sport, and you're best qualified to make those choices. Now, in the plyometric world, we said in general prep there were three bases to hit: skill-based horizontal, skill-based vertical, and if you're a volume person, if you're in a big jumping sport, then we might use in-place jumps as a volumetric booster there, okay? Then we move into more intense forms of jumping: extended bounds and or depth jumps. Again, the sport demands will dictate whether you'll do extended bounds or depth jumps, or possibly some combination of both. Now, again, the depth jumping and the bounds represent the high end of our polarized approach. The same stuff that we did in general prep, these horizontal and vertical skill-based bounds, those are the low end of our polarized approach. And then, once again, once we get in season in both phases, we make sport-specific choices. Here, we look at our Olympic lifting program here. We begin, and every session we do is a basic power development session. So everything we do, every session is in that 60-65% type of zone where we